Have you ever been work as a night shift or go home alone in the middle of the night? Well, it's time for you to hear a compilation of short stories of people who work at night and experienced something creepy. Story number 1. They know my name. It was after midnight. I was closing up shop and getting ready to go home when the lights suddenly went out. I was a little alarmed, but figured it was just a power failure, and I grabbed my flashlight to find my way. That's when I heard something. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard a tapping. It reminded me of someone knocking on a door. I was frozen in panic, not wanting to move an inch. Then there were voices, but they were faint and whispering. They were clearly coming from the back of the store. My heart was pounding as I slowly made my way towards the voices. I was so scared, I could hardly breathe. When I finally reached the source of the voices, I could see them. There, standing in the dark shadows, were 3 figures, whispering in low tones. They were ghostly and translucent, almost like phantoms. I had no way of knowing if they were friendly or hostile, so I slowly backed away. Just as I was about to turn and run, one of them called out to me in a raspy voice, "Pablo." Terrified, I ran out of the store as fast as I could and didn't look back. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I do know that it was one of the creepiest experiences I have ever had. To this day I still feel a chill when I recall that moment in time. Story number 2. Closing time. Robert was the security guard assigned to close up the shop late at night. He had done this many nights before with no issues, but tonight felt different. There was an eerie silence that echoed through the empty store. The shadows hovering from corner to corner made him uneasy as he walked around making sure everything was locked up. When he was nearly done, he noticed movement coming out of one of the aisles. As his heart skipped a beat, he stepped closer to find something he never expected. 2 figures in white robes, floating in the air. He was petrified and couldn't move. One of the figures started to move towards him, causing him to panic and take a step back. Then he heard a voice that sounded like it was coming from the other figure, and it said, "We have been watching you for a while and we need a favor." The figure continued, "Do not be afraid. We have been here for too long and need to go back home. We need you to send us back." Robert was in shock and didn't know what to do. Even though he was scared, he felt like he had no choice. He slowly nodded, and, before he could even say anything, the 2 figures began to swirl around in a circle and flew out of the store. Robert stepped outside and watched as they disappeared. He knew what he had just seen and knew he had to tell someone. He quickly called his boss to tell him what happened, and she assured him that everything was all right and to just go home. As Robert drove away from the store, he was still in shock. He felt relieved but also scared at the same time. He had just experienced something horrific with ghosts that he would never forget. Before we continue to the next story, why don't you ask yourself if you still have the guts to continue, because here we are for story number 3. I am alone. Jericho had just finished up his work overtime when he got up from his chair and decided it was time to head home. He was already alone in the office, and as the night seemed to close in around him, the dark corridors began to fill with a foreboding sense of dread. Try as he might have to fight it off, Jericho's heart was starting to race as he made his way to the elevator. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination or something else, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. He made it to the elevator without incident, and he was about to hit the button to take him down to the lobby when he heard a noise from down the hallway, something that sounded like a whisper. Jericho froze, his heart pounding in his chest as fear paralyzed him. Just when he thought he was going to lose it completely and run out of the office, Jericho heard a voice say, "It's all right, Jericho, you are safe here." He slowly turned around, but there was no one there. Taking a deep breath, he hit the button for the elevator and rode down to the lobby in silence. Jericho was shaken up by his experience, but he was determined to find out what, or who, had spoken to him earlier. The next day he went back to the office and asked around, but no one had any answers. He enlisted the help of his colleagues and security guards, but still no one knew what had happened the night before. As his search went on, Jericho eventually came to the conclusion that what he had heard had to be some kind of spirit. He wasn't sure if it was one of the many ghosts rumored to haunt the office building, but whatever it was, it had scared him enough to make him almost forget about the overtime and run out of the building. From then on, Jericho was more careful to leave the office on time and try to avoid working late at night. He knew that whatever was out there in the dark had been a warning, and he wasn't about to take any chances. Story number 4, Abandoned Floor. Jose arrived to the old, abandoned floor late at night. A chill ran down his spine as he looked around. He was the janitor and he had been left to clean this floor alone. He had done this dozens of times before, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this night. He made his way around the darkened corridors, sweeping and mopping the floor and picking up the random debris strewn about. He was almost done when he heard a faint but unmistakable sound coming from one of the rooms at the far end of the hall. Jose paused for a minute as a sudden chill filled the air. He slowly made his way towards the sound, curiosity and fear battling inside him. As he stepped into the room, he was horrified by what he saw. Sitting in the corner was a ghostly figure, illuminated by a hazy, white light emanating from its body. As it slowly moved its head and stared at Jose, he could feel his body trembling with fear. Without warning, the figure moved towards Jose, who instinctively jumped back and started to make his way towards the door. In an instant, the ghostly figure had him completely surrounded and was screaming in a guttural and hoarse voice. It seemed to reach out to him with coral hands, and the pain emanating from its touch was unimaginable. Jose could barely believe what was happening. He screamed for help, but there was no answer. He was completely alone with this eerie apparition, and he feared for his very life. Suddenly, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure receded into the shadows. Jose, shaken from the horrific experience, made his way back to the exit and ran out of the building. He was grateful to be alive, but the memory of that night would haunt him for a long time. If you're still here, I want to congratulate you for being able to conquer those creepy true stories that might happen to you one day. Get ready because we will come to final story. Story number 5, Unwanted Passenger. Chris was driving his taxi late at night, the only light coming from the headlights of his car piercing through the darkness of the night. He had been driving for long hours and was exhausted. All that was keeping him awake was the thoughts of reaching home. Finally, he had reached the town he wanted and was on his way home when he looked at his rearview mirror, expecting to see empty passenger seat. He was horrified to see a man sitting on the passenger seat. He looked ghastly, with his pale white skin and his red eyes. Chris knew who he was and started shivering. He wanted to press the accelerator and get away from this creepy situation, but his legs seemed frozen. He felt like someone was making him stay there. The man turned to him with a dead stare and said, "This is not your final destination." Chris drove silently, afraid to speak out, hoping that his silent pleading for this man to leave him would be answered. Just as he was about to reach home, the man evaporated in thin air. Chris was relieved and he crashed into the arms of his loved ones and told them what had happened. They told Chris that this man was, in fact, a ghost who was looking for help. He was lost between the realms of life and death and needed to reach his final destination. Chris was relieved that his prayers were answered and he was safe. He felt humbled and grateful that he was able to help a spirit find his way home. From that day onwards, he felt a lot more courage on the late-night drives, knowing that he had a friend keeping him company. That's the last story shared by our senders. If you want your story to be featured, don't hesitate to contact us. We are willing to make your story be featured here on Haunted Stories. Please subscribe if you wanted to hear more of our stories. Happy haunted everyone until the next stories.